This is the last in our series on Communism in East Asia, which is Volume 3 of next year's ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2018, and we're dealing with Indonesia in this last set of lectures. Indonesia is just south of the Philippines and Indochina, and just north of Australia. It has a long history of primitive communism, going back to 1.4 million years. So it covered two species according to the classification used in this textbook. And it has the distinction of being one of the most populous countries in the world today. So we're going to start this first lecture on primitive communism in Indonesia with a discussion of the geology and the geography of this Indonesian archipelago that sits astride the equator. And so, as you can imagine, it's both hot and humid all year round. Now, geologically, the area of modern Indonesia appeared from under the Southeast Asian seas as a result of the Indian and Australian plates colliding and slipping under the Sunda plate sometime in the early Cenozoic era, around 63 million years ago. Now, this tectonic collision created the Sunda volcanic arc that has produced island chains of Sumatra, Java, and the Lesser Sunda Islands. The active volcanic arc created a supervolcano that today is Lake Toba in Sumatra. The massive eruption of the Toba supervolcano occurred sometime between 69,000 and 77,000 years ago and instigated the Toba catastrophe, a global volcanic winter. Other notable volcanoes in the Sunda Arc are Mount Tambora and Krakatau. The region created instability due to volcano and tectonic activity that created global climate change. This change has included lowlands drowned under shallow seas, as well as the formation, connection, and disconnection of islands through narrow land bridges. The Indonesian archipelago reached its present configuration during the thaw after the Pleistocene, that is, the last ice age. And before that period, the Sundaland was linked with the Asian mainland. It was an extension of Indochina and a route of migration for Asian animals and humans. Geologically, the New Guinea island and the shallow seas of Arafura is the northern part of the Australia tectonic plate, and once connected as a land bridge identified as Sahul Land. During the last ice age from 22,000 to 10,000 BP, the Earth experienced global climate change, and after the 22,000 BP maximum of what we call the Wisconsin Ice Age in North America, there was a gradual global warming. A rising average temperature caused the melting of polar ice caps and the rising of sea levels. Now, Sundaland was submerged under a shallow sea, creating the Malacca Strait and the South China Sea, the Karamata Strait, and Java Sea. During that period, the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the islands around them were formed. On the east, New Guinea and Aru Islands were separated from the Australian mainland. The rise of sea levels created isolated areas that separated plant and animal species and human populations. Now, in terms of the natural and social geography, Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous nation, with 203 million people living on nearly 1,000 permanently settled islands. 300 ethnic groups with their own languages and dialects range in population from 70 million Javanese and 30 million Sudanese on the main islands to peoples numbering only a few thousands on the remote islands. Indonesia's contemporary borders are those of Netherlands East Indies, which was fully formed at the beginning of the 20th century through Dutch colonization that began in the AD 1600s. In 1850, an Englishman, J.R. Logan, in Malaya, coined the name Indonesia, meaning Indian Islands. This word is derived from the Greek Indos for India and Nisos, or islands. It has parallels in Melanesia, the Black Islands, Micronesia, the Small Islands, in Polynesia, the Many Islands. In 1884, the German geographer Adolf Bastian used it in the title of his book, Indonesian. In 1928, nationalists adopted Indonesia as the name for their nation. Most Indonesian islands are multi-ethnic with large and small groups forming geographical enclaves. Towns within such enclaves include the dominant ethnic group and some members of immigrant groups. Large cities, of course, consist of many ethnic groups, with some having an ethnic majority. West Sumatra and South Sulawesi have developed rivers, ports, plains, and mountain environments with political and administrative policies of different and evolving types over the centuries. North Sumatra, South Sulawesi, and East Java are ethnically mixed, while West Sumatra, Bali, and Aceh are homogeneous. Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago nation, located along the equator in humid tropics. It extends 2,300 miles from east to west and is surrounded by oceans, seas, and straits. It shares an island border with East Malaysia and Brunei on Borneo, or Kalimantan, and with Papua New Guinea on New Guinea, also with Timor-Leste on Timor. West Malaysia lies across the Straits of Malacca, the Philippines lies to the northeast, and Australia lies to the south. The location of the archipelago has played a profound role in economic, political, cultural, and religious developments there. For more than 2,000 years, trading ships sailed between the great civilizations of India and China through the waters and islands of the Indies. The islands also supplied Indonesian spices and forest products to that trade. The alternating east and west monsoon winds made the Indies a layover point for traders and others from diverse nations who brought their languages, ideas about political order, and their arts and religions. Small and then large kingdoms grew because of and as part of that great trade. Steamships altered some trade patterns, but the region's strategic locations between East and South Asia and Arabia remains. Indonesia consists of all or parts of some of the world's largest islands of Sumatra, Java, most of Kalimantan, that is Borneo, Sulawesi, the Celebes, Halmahera, and Papua New Guinea. There are numerous smaller islands, of which Bali, east of Java, is best known. These islands have mountain peaks of 9,000 feet or more. There are 400 volcanoes, of which 100 are active, with 29 recorded eruptions between 1973 and 1990. Volcanic lava and ash created the rich soils of upland Sumatra and all of Java and Bali and have nurtured rice cultivation for thousands of years. The inner islands of Java, Madura, and Bali make up the geographical and population center of the archipelago. Java, one of the world's most densely settled places, with 2,108 people per square mile in 1990, occupies 78% of the nation's land area and 60% of Indonesia's population. The outer islands, which form an arc west, north, and east of the inner ones, have about 90% of the land area, but only about 42% of the population. The cultures of the inner islands are more homogeneous, with only 4 major cultural groups. These are the Sudanese in West Java, the Javanese in Central and East Java, the Madarese on Madura and in East Java, and the Balinese on Bali. The outer islands have hundreds of ethno-linguistic groups. Forests of the inner islands, once plentiful, are largely gone. Kalimantan, West Papua, and Sumatra still have rich jungles now threatened by population expansion and logging, as are some eastern islands such as Sulawesi and the Lesser Sundas, the island chain east of Bali. Now, Indonesia's population was 203,500,000 in the year 2000, projected to be 254 million by 2020. About 20% live in towns and cities, and the other 80% feature 3 out of 5 farming families. 26 cities have populations over 200,000. Nearly all of Indonesia's 400 languages are subgroups of the Austronesian family. Indonesia's languages are not mutually intelligible, though some subgroups are more similar than others. There are 2 non-Austronesian languages. One of them is spoken in North Halmahera, another of them is spoken in West Timor. Also, there are very numerous languages of Papua New Guinea that are non-Austronesian. Most people's first language is a local one. A 1923 Congress made the Malay language the national language of Indonesia. Nevertheless, only a small minority living in Sumatra along the Straits of Malacca speak Malay as their native language. From a capitalist point of view, Malay made sense. Malay had long been a commercial and governmental lingua franca that bound diverse peoples, and ethnically diverse traders and local people used Malay in ports and hinterlands in its grammatically simplified form known as Market Malay or Pidgin Malay. In addition, colonial governments in British Malaya and the Netherlands, Indies, used High Malay in official documents, and a variety of Christian missionaries had translated their Bible into that language. Now we can move on to the primitive communist period in Indonesia. Paleolithic Indonesia features a small assemblage of some 20 stone tools, including a cleaver and several flakes from a Middle Pleistocene sequence, and then Ngibun. And then I give the references, archaeological references. At Sangbung Machan, there is a chopper and retouched flake in a layer dated to the Middle Late Pleistocene, and references. There is an earlier large and stratigraphically secure assemblage in the lower level of Song Terrace Cave of 800 pieces. They are in an alluvial deposit. Some 40% are retouched flakes, and I give the most recent archaeological reference there. Java has a long and rich record of human occupation beginning in Homo erectus times 1.5 million years ago. Java lies on the southwest margin of Sunda and mainland Southeast Asia. The researchers there note that since bifaces are rarely found in deep caves, their absence here is not conclusive evidence of their absence in the region. And this brings us to the subject of the Movius line. When I was an anthropology undergraduate from 66 to 68, and an archaeology graduate student from 68 to 74, a half-century ago, the Old World Paleolithic was taught according to the hypothetical line drawn by Professor Movius, dividing east from west. Now, Hallam L. Movius received his PhD from Harvard and became a professor of archaeology there, and eventually he became the curator of Paleolithic archaeology at Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. In 1948, he proposed the existence of a line dividing Acheulean hand axe users of Europe, Africa, and Western Asia from the chopper tool industry users of East Asia. Until recently, the Movius line divided bifacially worked implements into hand axes of the West and chopper chopping tools of the East. The latter in 1948 were known from Indonesia, Korea, in the Imjin and Hantan River basins, and China in the Dingun, Luan, and Bos basins. Since then, that dividing line has been shown to be non-existent, and I give the references which run from the years 2000 to 2010. There are a growing number of reports that have found that in East Asia, the early Paleolithic complexes are far more inclusive of artifact types. As this volume has progressed, I have shown that many early Paleolithic sites in East Asia include hand axes, and then I give more references. In 2017, Chinese researchers reported on the Fengshudao Middle Pleistocene site in the Bos Basin in Guangxi, southern China, and then I give an internet reference. The Bos Basin hand axes came to the attention of the international scientific community primarily for two reasons. The first is the age of 803,000 BP places it in the early to middle Pleistocene transition. The presence of Acheulean-type bifaces disproves the validity of the Movius line. Whether the tektite association with these hand axes is irrelevant because they are there and of early Paleolithic date. Now, the in situ excavation of tektites proves they were not redeposited. They are in association with bifaces from one stratigraphic level in one site, and the date of these stone tools is 803,000 BP. The Fengshudao Homo sapiens were using locally available quartz quartzite, and sandstone river cobbles. In some aspects, the Feng Shui-Dao hand axe morphology differs from the typical Western Acheulean, being larger and thick compared with the Western world bifaces, and other hand axes from Eastern Asia, for example in the Luonan Basin of China, the Imjin-Hantan River basins of Korea. However, the form is identical to those of the West. Now, we have the hunting and gathering peoples of the lower Paleolithic. In Indonesia, we have the first occupation well over more than 1 million years ago, and therefore, following the classification used in this textbook, where 1 million years is the dividing line between the Homo species of erectus and Sapiens, we know that Indonesia, like Indochina and China, was first occupied by Homo erectus. Paleolithic Homo erectus peoples used tools of stone, wood, antler, ivory, and shell. In 2007, 2 wild cattle bones were discovered in Sangaran and Ngandong that had 18 cut marks. Thick clamshell flake tools made these cut marks while wild cattle were being butchered. The context is the Pumkang Gan Formation in Sangiran dating between 1.6 and 1.5 million years ago. This tool use is the oldest evidence of shell tool use in the world, and of course in Indonesia. Fossilized remains of Homo, called Java Man in the press of the late 1800s, were first discovered by the Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois at Trinil in 1891. They are at least 700,000 years old. Other Homo fossils were found at Sangaran in the 1930s by the anthropologist Gustav Heinrich Ralph von Koenigswald. He also uncovered fossils at Ngandong alongside more advanced tools, redated in 2011 to between 550,000 and 143,000 years ago, and in 1977 another Homo skull was discovered at Sambubakan. In 2003 on the island of Flores, Homo fossils were found that date between 74,000 and 13,000 years ago. These are small and dubbed in the press as Flores Man. These 3-foot-tall Homo specimens have to be sapiens by date and reflect the lower end of the Paleolithic Homo stature spectrum. The Homo specimens from Flores Island lie in sediment recently dated from 60,000 to 50,000 years ago. In 2010, stone tools were discovered on Flores dating from 1 million years ago. This is oldest evidence in the world and proof for early human technology making sea crossings. And then onward to Oceania. Early humans traveled by sea and spread from mainland Asia eastward to New Guinea and Australia. Homo sapiens reached Oceania by 45,000 years ago, if not earlier. We will devote Volume 4 in this series to Oceania. However, the following comments will suffice for now in our discussion of primitive communism in Indonesia. In 2011, evidence was discovered in neighboring East Timor showing that 42,000 years ago, these early settlers had high-level maritime skills. Of course, these sailing skills relied upon the boat technology needed to make ocean crossings to reach Australia and the other islands. These people caught and consumed big deep-sea fish, such as tuna, along the way, as well as many other kinds of fish. Racial variety, rock art, and ornaments. Early Homo sapiens, like modern Homo sapiens, had a variety of subspecies variations, all reached the archipelago by 45,000 years ago. All Southeast Asian Homo sapiens fossils before about 7,000 BP are of the Australoid group of peoples. They survive in isolated pockets in Malaya, Semang, and the Philippines today as the black-skinned, wiry-haired Negritos. It is thought, therefore, that Australoid peoples were the original inhabitants of the entire region, related to Papuan, that is Melanesian, and Australian Aborigines. The genome studies discovered that the inhabitants of central and eastern Indonesia archipelago have significant Australoid or Melanesian ancestry. By 40,000 BP, early humans produced prehistoric rock art motifs in volcanic caves on the island of Sulawesi. The most notable rock art sites in Indonesia are in the Maro's Pankep rock art sites in the caves in South Sulawesi province. There are two distinct style types of art within these caves. The first style is of human hands, stenciled made by mouth-blown spray of wet pigment around human hands pressed against cave walls. And the second, less common style type of cave art is characterized by images of larger, naturalistic profile paintings of wildland mammals. These animals were common on Sulawesi Island in the Pleistocene, as were their small buffalo and wart pig models. Next to Altamira in Spain, the Maros Pankep cave are one of the most extensive carved rock art in the world. Cave rock art in the world. These Indonesian prehistoric cave paintings might also be the oldest cave art in the world. Ornaments made from bones and teeth of Barbarossa deer pig and bear cuscuses, that is Alarops ursinensis, marsupial, was unearthed from limestone caves in Sulawesi, and the jewelry was made from teeth of the primitive pigs and bones of marsupials and dates between 30,000 and 22,000 BP. Now, the Austroasiatic migration or admixture. Genome studies show several ethnic groups in western Indonesian archipelago that have significant Austroasiatic genome markers exist. However, none of them speaks Austroasiatic languages. This means only that the laws of genetic change and those of glottochronological change operate temporally independently. In terms of racial variety, there was once a substantial Austroasiatic presence in island Southeast Asia. In this occupation, Austronesian speakers migrated throughout, and this Austronesian expansion began by 5,000 years ago. This was the final stage of primitive communism, wherein the lush, broad-spectrum hunting-gathering fishing technology had produced sufficient surpluses for population explosion. Horticulture, on top of that, pushed these people over the top. Seafaring began as people sailed through the region, searching for new lands to dispel population pressure, and island hopping from Taiwan through the Philippines archipelago into the central Indonesian archipelago was the established pattern of so doing. From there, these terminal primitive communists expanded to western and eastern Indonesia, where they met earlier inhabitants of the Australoid people. As importantly, with the rise of the chiefdom transitional stages and the subsequent class and state kingdoms and empires, the Underground Railroad sort of route for fleeing underclass peoples was well established. By 4000 BP, the expansion of seafaring Austronesians from Asia had spread throughout maritime Southeast Asia all the way to Oceania and would eventually reach Madagascar. Austronesian peoples form the majority of the modern population of Indonesia. Now, Neolithic tribal agriculture. The polished stone tools of Neolithic tribal agriculture, such as polished stone axes and stone hoes, were developed by the Austronesian people in the Indonesian archipelago. Agriculture in Indonesia started in growing rice, coconut, sugar palm, taro, tubers, shallots, and tropical fruits. At first, these crops were being cultivated by hunter-gatherers experimenting with semi-sedentary village life in the Indonesian archipelago. Evidence of wild rice cultivation on the island of Sulawesi dates from 5000 BP. This gave way to simple chiefdom rice agriculture, and ever since then rice has been a staple food for Indonesians. Rice holds the central place in Indonesian culture and cuisine today, and rice growing has shaped the landscape when rice is sold at markets to be served in most meals. The two types of agriculture are predominant in Indonesia. These are 1. The permanent irrigated rice farming, or sawah, S-A-W-A-H, that dominates Java, Bali, and the highlands, all along the western coast of Sumatra. Secondly, the rotating slash and burn, or ladang, L-A-D-A-N-G, farming of rice, corn, and other crops found in other parts of Sumatra and other islands. And finally, there's a third form, the fixed rain-fed fields of rice that are prominent in Sulawesi. During the tribal agricultural revolution, many areas became rich in vegetables, tropical fruit, sago, and other cultivated or forest crops. By ATC and slave stage times, there were commercial plantations of coffee, tea, tobacco, coconuts, and sugar in both the inner and outer islands, and plantation-grown products such as rubber, palm oil, and sisal were prominent in Sumatra, and in Java, coffee, sugar, and tea predominated. Opium and spices such as cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were grown mainly in the outer islands, especially to the east as they are today. Maluku, or the Moluccas, gained its appellation, the Spice Islands, from the importance of trade, servitude epic through colonial times. By the slave stage, gold, tin, and copper were mined in Sumatra, Bangka, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Papua for domestic and international markets as they are today. Rivers flowing from mountainous or jungle interiors through coastal plains arrive at the sea, where ports were built as early as ATC times. These ports gave rise to the slave stage, to a mercantile capitalist class that traded farm and forest products in inter-island and then in international trade for centuries. So we come to chiefdoms to kingdoms, the transition to the slave stage. Chiefdoms built large stone structures called megalithic in Indonesian archaeology, and these flourished in the Indonesian Archipelago. Then Javanese stone inscriptions dated from the 8th century AD describe a chief levied tax in rice. Some panels of bas-relief on temple walls at Borobudur and Prambanan describe agricultural activities. Next to rice, the bas-reliefs of Borobudur describe other indigenous agricultural products such as the banana, the coconut, sugar cane, Java apple, jackfruit, durian, and mangosteen, and I give the scientific names for each following their common name. The importance of rice in Indonesian culture is demonstrated through the reverence of Dewi Sri, the rice goddess of ancient Java and Bali. Accordingly, the agricultural cycles linked to rice cultivation were celebrated through rituals such as the Sudanese Serentown Rice Harvest Festival. In Bali, the traditional Subak irrigation management was created to ensure the water supplies for rice paddies. Managed by priests and created around water temples. Indonesian vernacular architecture also recognizes numbers of lumbung or rice barn styles such as the Sudanese luit, Sesak-style rice barn, Toraha's Tongkonan shape to Minangkabau's Rangkiang. Local kingdoms in Indonesia were among the first earliest polities to participate in global spice trade. The ancient maritime empires of Srivijaya from the 7th to 11th centuries AD and Majapahit 13th to 15th centuries AD, for example, were actively involved in the spice trade with China, India, and the Middle East. Ports of Sunda and Banten were important centers of the pepper trade back to the 14th and 17th century. The Indonesian archipelago is the host of Austronesian megalith cultures, both past and present. Several megalith sites and structures are also found in Indonesia. Menhirs, dolmens, stone tables, ancestral stone statues, and step pyramid structures called Punden Berendak were discovered in various sites in Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi, and the Lesser Sunda Islands. Punden Step Pyramid and menhir can be found at Pagayangan, Sisolak, and Gunung Padang, West Java. Siperi megalith site, also in West Java, displayed monolith, stone terraces, and sarcophagus. The Punden Step Pyramid is the predecessor for and basic design of later temple structure in Java after the adoption of Hinduism and Buddhism by that native population. The 8th century Borobudur and the 15th century Candi Suku featured the step pyramid structure. Lor Lindu National Park in central Sulawesi houses ancient megalith relics, such as ancestral stone statues, mostly located in the Bada, Besoa, and Napu valleys. There are contemporary megalith building people on Nias, an isolated island off the western coast of North Sumatra. In addition, the Batak people in the interior of North Sumatra and on Sumba Island in East Nusa Tenggara build megaliths, as do the Toraja people in the interior of South Sulawesi. These megalith cultures remained preserved, isolated, and undisturbed well into the late 1800s. The Dongsun culture spread to Indonesia with techniques of bronze casting, wet field rice cultivation, ritual buffalo sacrifice, megalithic pack practices, and ikat weaving methods. In the Batak area of Sumatra, Toraja, and Sulawesi, and several islands of Nusa Tenggara, ancient technology is still utilized. Prehistoric artifacts from this period are Nekara bronze drums, discovered throughout the Indonesian Archipelago, and ceremonial bronze axes. So, to summarize the prehistory, primitive communism Paleolithic Indonesia ranges from stone tool using forest hunter-gatherers to tribal agricultural society. The latter began as experimenters with grain cultivation and domestic animals, and in time these tribal agriculturalists left primitive communism through two transitional chiefdom stages. These began as simple chiefdoms with specialized crafts in weaving and pottery, as well as stone tool production, and in turn ideal environmental conditions encouraged agriculture and the mastering of wet field rice production by the 8th century BC. Advanced theocratic chiefdoms then emerged, and some of these simple chiefdoms with villages and towns. Class-divided, state-organized slave stage kingdoms flourished by the 1st century AD. These kingdoms evolved with their own ethnic and tribal religions. Java was and is always hot and has abundant rain and volcanic soil. The ATCs and slave stage kingdoms had perfect conditions for irrigated rice production, in contrast to dry field rice. The rank division of society had religion to encourage the rubes to do as they were told in the planning of irrigation agriculture, and that produced great surpluses as the reward. Then the division of AT society into true class society, with the state, that is the army and police, in the hands of the ruling classes, was made. That final social structural transition made the transition from dry rice cultivation to wet rice cultivation an easy one, given the coerced disciplined labor now available for the wet rice fields. Buni culture, clay pottery, flourishes in the coastal northern West Java and Banten around 400 BC to AD 100. Budi culture was probably the predecessor of the Tarumanagara kingdom and one of the earliest Hindu kingdoms in Indonesia that produces numerous inscriptions and marks the beginning of the historical period in Java. And that brings us to an end of this first discussion about primitive communism and its long history in Indonesia, and a short discussion of the chiefdom transition. And in our next lecture, we'll cover the period of the servitude epoch up and through the emergence of capitalism in the Indonesian Republic.